but he's going to shoot. Okay.
Whatever. It's the people can know how bad Gary Trent was last night. They can know these things. Everything falls apart when you don't wear your Sixers gear, Mike. I think that's what it is. Is it a Flyer sweatshirt at least? Okay, good. Still wrapping. Good morning, guys. It is the Awesemo NBA Strategy Show. Kicking off the weekend with a small NBA slate here, 5 games, but not short on injury news. A lot of these games just filled with injury situations. Do us favors, you guys, come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And Adam, I also want to ask you, how are you going to handle potential blowout risk on this slate? Because it's only 5 games, but we have the Timberwolves favored by 13 points over the Portland Trailblazers. Memphis favored by 15.5 over Orlando. Is that going to impact any of your decision-making tonight?
So the one thing I can say with confidence right now is that based on how things have gone, whatever I decide to do, it's just going to go poorly and be the opposite of what I should have done. In a spot like Memphis, Orlando, I think that it's reasonable when you do projections to, take a minute or two off. But I also think, and we've talked about this a lot on previous shows, you really have to be careful doing that unless you are doing something to incorporate like greater point per minute production. Because you don't necessarily want to just be saying, oh, I think Memphis is going to do so well that I don't want to play John Morant or something like that. So, and obviously on the Orlando side, like there's more risk there because if they get blown out, their guys probably just sucked across the board. But you also, like big spreads tend to come with lower ownership too. So I do think it's something that is like a really fine line because, and that's not even touching on, like Lofty and I talk a lot about how, with respect to DFS, like this game could be what is it, a 17-point spread? This game could be
depends where you look, but like Memphis as high as 16, and then the Minnesota Portland game like 13, 12.5, 13.5.
Yeah. So, but like these games could be 12 to 14-point games from literally the first quarter until the end of the game, and you're losing like 2 minutes from guys, 3 minutes from guys, and they are producing well. So who really cares in that case? It's still just so difficult, I think, to do a whole lot. And then, also there's just the chance that weird stuff happens. I mean, it was 2 or 3 days ago where we had 4 games with double-digit spreads, and we talked about, oh, well, these legitimately look like blowout games, blah, blah, blah. One of them went to overtime. The underdog won in one of them. 2 of the games with like sub 5-point spreads were blowouts. I'm really hesitant to really do much with blowouts in DFS.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable enough way to approach it, but it was worth picking your brain on it, and I know that that's something that's also going to be on the minds of some people in chat as they're starting to build lineups. But start to talking about the individual games here, starting with the San Antonio Spurs at the Charlotte Hornets. This is the game with the highest total on the slate, 240.5. So massive total in this game, almost 10 points higher than any other game we're looking at today. Starting with the Spurs side of the game, there are a couple injuries here. Devin Vassell, he is questionable to play. Lonnie Walker, he is questionable to play. I think at this point, everybody knows the deal with DeJounte Murray. He's a very good guard to pay up for. He has a massive amount of upside. But talking about some of the value options here, what would open up for you if Vassell and or Walker don't play?
Yeah, I mean, if both of those guys are out, minutes definitely open up. It's just a matter of where do they go, because they have Bates Diop, they have Josh Primo, they have Josh Richardson. Richardson hasn't, really been a big part of this team since coming over. My assumption is that Primo would be the first one to, get more minutes in addition to McDermott's minutes being more stable. So, I mean, 3,700 McDermott would look a little bit better. Maybe he goes from, 26 minutes to 30 minutes or something like that. Primo at 3,100 I think would be ahead of Richardson and Bates Diop in the rotation. I don't necessarily think that it opens up any one guy that I absolutely love, though. I think it just turns into more of like, normally I barely play McDermott, and I certainly wouldn't be playing Primo and Richardson. Now, maybe I'm playing, kind of just mixing those guys in a little bit and hoping for the best.
I think the one other than DeJounte Murray, I mean, I don't know what else we could add about him, particularly on FanDuel. DeJounte Murray is 9,600. It's just a ridiculous price tag in this matchup. He's going to be uber chalk today on FanDuel. I could see myself getting to a lot of Keldon Johnson, particularly on FanDuel, just 5,900, especially if Vassell and Walker out. It would just solidify those minutes for Keldon Johnson a whole bunch. But let's talk about DeJounte Murray on both DK and FanDuel, but specifically that 9,600 price tag on FanDuel. Do you just see any way getting around playing a lot of Murray? Because, I mean, he's pretty clearly, to me, the best, one of the best, if not the best options on the slate at that price tag. Plus, he's point guard and shooting guard eligibility. He's expected to be in nearly 50% of the field's lineups, but I just think it's warranted.
Yeah, I don't really see an easy way to get away from that. Like, technically, he's projected to be over-owned at 48%, but he has a 41% chance of being in the optimal lineup. For somebody at $9,600, that's pretty crazy. Now, to be fair, you also have LeBron with like a 50% chance of being in the optimal lineup on FanDuel. So, but he's getting a lot of ownership as well. It's just a situation where it's a broken price, and guys like DeJounte Murray typically aren't the ones that I'm looking to get away from when sites mess up their price. It sucks. It makes the game less fun, but it kind of, to me, it's a situation where it's just like, okay, well, do I want to lose money because I'm mad about the price, or do I want to just suck it up and play with one less roster spot?
Yeah, and I mean, given the total of this game, I would think that there should be more Spurs guys to get to, but Pop runs such a deep bench. And now we've got guys, like Vassell and Walker individually, they've been priced up. You mentioned lack of interest in Doug McDermott. Zach Collins doesn't play all that many minutes. It's hard for me to find that many guys to really want to get behind outside of DeJounte Murray. Do you think I'm missing anything here?
No, I mean, I'm with you on Keldon Johnson at 6,100, and I do think his minutes look a little bit better if guys are out as well. Jakob Poeltl's in a good spot. He's pulling 15% ownership at 7,700 on DraftKings. I think that makes sense. It looks good. But yeah, there's not a whole lot, otherwise. If Vassell and Walker are in, they're certainly playable as well. But I think it's, Murray, the clear-cut number one, Poeltl and Johnson, 2 and 3, and then the rest.
So let's hit on the Charlotte side of the game now. And once again, it's a game with such a high total. I feel like we should be targeting it a lot. LaMelo Ball has not had very many big games recently. It's actually been a minute since he had a really big game. His last real ceiling game was against the Detroit Pistons on February 11th. So we're looking at almost a month since we saw a real ceiling out of LaMelo Ball. Do you think this is a spot where we could see him start to break out again? His price is down, and it's not like he's picking up that much ownership. 8,500 in this spot on DK, probably a month ago, and be looking at like 40% on LaMelo. Today is 18%. Over on FanDuel, he's only 8,000, but still project for 25% ownership. So not that long ago at this salary, he would have just been the stone cold chalk on the slate. Do you think he's hitting some sort of wall towards the end of the season, fatigue, or is it just kind of coincidence that he hasn't had a good game in a while?
I think it's mostly coincidence, and also it's been some playing time issues. Like, in general, we're seeing him not play as many minutes as, guys like Bridges and all of that. But even if you get 32 to 33 minutes from Ball, that should be pretty good. But like last game, he was in massive foul trouble. He played 8 minutes against Cleveland, which is just insane. But then even looking back at some previous games, like played 30 against Milwaukee. That game was a blowout. Played 38 against Detroit, 29 in a blowout against Toronto, 39 against Miami. 41 against Minnesota, 33 and 32 in the 2 previous games. And over the last month, he's still averaging 1.23 DraftKings points per minute, still has a 28% usage rate, 31% assist percentage. I think it's kind of just been, the point per minute production is down a bit. But I think it's kind of just been some fluky stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And also, he's fouled out in a bunch of those games. Like you said, the game against Miami, although that was an overtime game, fouls out in that game. Game against Minnesota, fouls out in that game. Game against Memphis, 5 personal fouls. And if I'm not mistaken, he's only fouled out 3 times the entire year. So it does seem like just a bit of a run of bad luck here. I would expect it to uptick. Also, a lot of difficult matchups in there at Cleveland, at Milwaukee, against Memphis, Toronto, Miami. So this is obviously an easier spot against the Spurs. I think he's somebody I want to be overweight to the field on. Who else is catching your eye from the Charlotte Hornets? Because once again, this is a game expected to have a lot of scoring, but the prices are kind of high across the board.
Yeah, pricing's definitely come up here. I still think guys like Rozier and Bridges are certainly playable in a really appealing game like this. I think Bridges is a little bit more underpriced than Rozier, but Rozier is certainly a massive ceiling as well. As a reminder, goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about. Don't get too excited about what Terry Rozier did last game because he essentially was playing without LaMelo Ball. But he's still been very productive recently in general, even excluding that game. So I think behind Ball, Bridges and Rozier are my next two guys. PJ Washington at 5,100 looks fine. The centers are back to not playing alongside each other, which I think is warranted and expected. It was weird that they were playing alongside each other, but I think it makes it pretty difficult to want to get to much of either of them.
Yeah, and it's another thing, kind of like the Spurs situation, where despite all the scoring, it's hard to find that many guys to like. The same goes for Charlotte, because like you said, that situation there where for a minute there, we had, like Carroll and Plumlee playing minutes together, and there was more ceiling for both of them. When that's not the case, it's just hard to project any of them all that well. Then we've also got PJ Washington in the mix. I want to get a lot of exposure to this game, but outside of the stars and DeJounte Murray and LaMelo Ball, I don't know that I'm going to. Anything else you want to bring up from Charlotte?
Nope.
All right, so let's hit on the next game then, which is the Portland Trailblazers against the Minnesota Timberwolves. First game they're looking at on this slate with some of that blowout risk that we mentioned at the top. We do have Minnesota favored by, around 13 points, depending which book you're looking at. But this is a team still in the Portland Trailblazers that, even though they're big underdogs, a chance for blowout, I think it's hard to ignore some of the potential value. Drew Eubanks just signed a second 10-day contract. He's been starting. I think he makes for a good value option. They have Elijah Hughes. He's probably going to draw another start today. So from a value perspective, which are some of the Portland guys that are standing out?
So I'm with you on Eubanks at 4,600. I think he looks like a good value. Last game, I mean, we did get kind of the blueprint of what a blowout looks like for them, I guess, last game, because they just got destroyed by Phoenix. And this is a really bad team. So like, it wouldn't be surprising at all if it happens again. You only got 18 minutes from Eubanks in that game, but if they were able to be competitive, you're probably getting, 24 to 26. At 4,600, I think he looks pretty good. Trendon Watford got the garbage time, backed up Eubanks in the first half, then got garbage run without him, ended up getting to 30 minutes. I think it makes Watford look good as well, and he has power forward eligibility. I wouldn't play those two together because they're not sharing the floor, but basically, I think if this game's competitive, Eubanks ends up being good. If it's not competitive, Watford ends up being good. So I like both of those guys. CJ Ellaby got garbage run last game. He was the only starter, I believe, that played in the fourth quarter. Yeah, only starter that played in the fourth quarter. Got up to like 34 and a half minutes. He's only 4,100, looks like a decent value. And then Anthony Simons has a massive ceiling here. He's been very inefficient without everyone else on his team, offensively, which makes sense. But he's gonna have the opportunities to do literally everything for this team. Like Josh Hart isn't even playing, so there's even less for him to do. Ceiling is massive at 8K. Obviously a threat to be inefficient and then not get fourth quarter minutes.
Yeah, and Justice Winslow also out. One guy you didn't mention that I want to ask you about here is Elijah Hughes, because he started last game. He's still extremely cheap on FanDuel and DraftKings. But a couple of things happened last game. First and foremost, he sucked. He could not have been worse. He ends up playing 22 minutes. He shoots 1 of 8 from the field, scores 3 points. That's it. That's his entire stat line, as he goes 1 of 8 from the field with 3 points. But he also got hurt in that game. And I'm not exactly sure when he got hurt, because he wasn't able to finish the game. But I kind of think there's a chance that thumb injury was the reason why he wasn't able to make shots or accumulate other stats. Assuming Elijah Hughes starts again, which in itself is a pretty big if. We don't know for sure if that's going to be the case.
I'd be surprised if he doesn't with Hart out.
So is he somebody you're viewing as a good value option? Because I still think there's minutes upside there. And we've seen him find success in these kind of situations in the past. That game where everybody was out for the Utah Jazz, kind of similar situation here, everybody out for Portland. He played 41 minutes and scored 48 DraftKings points. So I still like getting to Elijah Hughes as a value option here. And at least as of now, he is not expected to be super, super popular. 9% projected ownership on FanDuel, DK 22%. That's some ownership, but not as much as what I think his upside could potentially be. So is he somebody you see yourself wanting to get to?
Yeah, I do. 3,100's a cheap price tag. In his career, going back to Utah, he's averaged 0.72 DraftKings points per minute. That's obviously not great, but when you're talking about a $3,100 guy that can play, upper 20s in minutes tonight, it's not bad. And then, like you said, this is a game that is outside of Anthony Simons. This is just a G League team where, I like Elijah Hughes is pretty likely to produce at a higher rate than, or at least get more opportunities than he normally would. In Utah, if he's playing as like the 10th guy off the bench or whatever, he's not going to produce a lot of fantasy points, whereas here he's going to have more opportunities because he's playing with a bunch of other terrible dudes. So, yeah, I think he looks like a good value, as does Keon Johnson, who I think steps into more minutes tonight with Josh Hart out.
Yeah, once again, it is an extended injury report for the Portland Trailblazers, in addition to the guys like Lillard and Nurkic being out. No Josh Hart, no Justice Winslow. And on the other side of the game, the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're dealing with injuries of their own. Anthony Edwards is questionable to play. We've talked quite a bit about how Anthony Edwards' production was down a little bit. It seemed to be correlated with a knee injury. And then lo and behold, he gets listed as questionable, is ruled out last game. Now he's questionable again today. I tend to think Minnesota is going to be cautious at this point and wait to make sure that he's totally 100%, especially because it seems like Minnesota is pretty safe in their spot in the play-in game. So I think there's a good chance that Edwards doesn't play today. If that is the case, who benefits the most from Minnesota?
Yeah, also seems like it would be a weird game to bring him back unless he's like 100% fine and just really wants to play. If he's out, it's a big benefit for Towns. We talked about that yesterday. He gets a big bump in usage. Obviously, there's blowout risk. You could certainly run into the same situation that you got yesterday where Towns had like 42 DraftKings points in 3 quarters and then you never saw him again. But phenomenal spot for him as well. Like the Blazers outside of Eubanks do not have a center, and Eubanks isn't exactly someone you're expecting to slow down Towns. Typically teams guard him with their 4. The Blazers, I guess, have plenty of those, but it's not like any of them are good. So Towns should just go absolutely nuts here. D'Angelo Russell and Patrick Beverley both look a little bit better if Edwards is out. They look fine even if he's in, but they both get a bit of a bump if he's out as well. Malik Beasley would get a bump if he's out, still $3,200, likely to play, mid-20s. He got 23 minutes yesterday. I project him for 24. That's where I'd be at again today. We talked about him at length yesterday, where he's not a great point per minute guy, but he's not bad. And this matchup's certainly good. It's just a spot where, especially on a 5-game slate, he just is going to be a pretty useful piece that allows you to get other stuff into your lineups.
And now let's also, I don't think this is what's going to happen, but I think in just the interest of covering all our bases here, if Anthony Edwards ends up playing, how would you approach him in that scenario? Because like we said before, if he plays, I assume it's only because he's totally 100%. There's no reason to bring him back in a game that Minnesota almost certainly wins easily if he's even like 90%. So if Edwards plays, what are you going to be doing with him in that kind of spot?
I would view him very similarly to guys like Russell and Beverley, just where he doesn't stand out in the sense of like, the way DeJounte Murray stands out or LaMelo stands out at 8,500, but he still has a massive ceiling at 7,400. And I'm with you that if he's playing, I assume he's not on a minutes limit, because what would be the point? So he would have that potential blowout risk, obviously. But if this game's somewhat competitive and he gets, 34 minutes here, he's pretty likely to have a good game. So if he's in, I think all of Russell, Edwards, Beverley just kind of become pieces that I'm mixing and matching into lineups.
Is there anything else from Minnesota here that you think is worth talking about?
If Edwards is out, you should get another McDaniel start. He should play around 28 minutes or so. Jared Vanderbilt certainly can have success against this front court. I think that McDaniels and Vanderbilt, like if Edwards is in, Vanderbilt still is okay in tournaments, but if Edwards is out, I think his minutes are a little bit more stable. But I would still view it as like Towns, the clear number 1, Beasley, the best value, Russell and Beverley, kind of like 2 and 3, and then Vanderbilt, McDaniels the next tier.
Yep, I think that all makes sense to me. Something else I want to shout out here. The NBA Strategy Show is sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. If you guys have not signed up for Yahoo, you can do it using the link in the description box below. And then if you head on over to Yahoo through that link, sign up, make a deposit, enter a contest, get yourself 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. You could also claim a free $10 of site credit over on Yahoo by clicking that link and signing up. So check all that out. Get access to all our tools behind the paywall, things like our projections, ownership projections, boom bust tool, all stuff that's invaluable when building NBA DFS lineups. All right, moving on with what is the best real-life game on the slate, the Philadelphia 76ers at the Miami Heat. And I want to start by asking you about the Philadelphia side of the game, because roles have kind of shuffled here now that James Harden is in the mix for the Philadelphia 76ers. And Harden himself has shown to have some pretty significant fantasy upside, but he's also taking away from Joel Embiid just a little bit. And as a result, I'm kind of finding it hard to get to players from the Philadelphia 76ers outside of some exposure to James Harden over on FanDuel, where he's been much cheaper than he is on DK. So Harden, who oddly has small forward eligibility on FanDuel, is only 10,400. I think that's reasonable looking, but I'm not really crazy about a lot of these Philly players over on DK, considering their prices and with James Harden in the mix. What do you make of the dynamic of this team now that Harden is there?
It's extremely difficult on DraftKings, I think, to get to much here. The way that I'm viewing this is that I think Embiid is the guy that projects better than Harden, on a game-to-game basis. I think he's the way I put it yesterday with Lofty. I think he's the one that is going to score, 60 to 65 fantasy points a higher percentage of the time. I think Harden's the one that is scoring 75 fantasy points a higher percentage of the time. I think you're just going to have because Harden's dominating assists here. He's rebounding. Embiid obviously rebounds as well. But Harden's absolutely dominating assists. He's getting to the line. He still has like a low to mid 20s usage rate. So I think you're going to get some of those games where Harden just posts massive triple doubles. Whereas Embiid, I think, is going to be the more like steady, consistent, less volatile, for lack of a better phrase, of the two. So at these prices, though, it's really, really tough to get to either. I actually think I prefer getting to Harden if I am paying up to be contrarian, just because, again, I think he's not that Embiid's never going to have a monster game, but I think Harden just kind of has the easier path because the assists and rebounds are going to be there, and then occasionally he's going to score 35 35 actual points as well.
Thing that concerns me about Embiid, and this is kind of a minor gripe because the usage rate is still, substantial, but we saw a period of about 6 weeks where Joel Embiid's usage rate was like 42% over that stretch, and he was scoring mass amounts of points. And just for a good barometer of how undervalued he was being at that time, I think he went on a stretch where he hit the over on his points prop, something like 15 games in a row. So it was just constant games of like 32, 36 points from Joel Embiid. He's not had a usage rate north of 40% in a single game with James Harden yet. And last game, his usage rate was only 26%. So I think that James Harden's situation, like Harden was playing alongside guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Now he goes to Philadelphia, he's playing with Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey. It's just other fairly high usage guys, but I don't really think anything has changed with James Harden. Joel Embiid has taken a pretty big cut in terms of what his overall role is. The assists are down, the usage is down. So I think this trade is impacting Embiid more than any other player on the team. I agree with you that there's obviously still upside there, but as just a center eligible player, I can't see myself getting to much of Embiid today.
Yeah, in the 4 games that they've played together now, Embiid has about a 34% usage rate. Like you said, he had a really low usage rate last game. Based on like what we had seen from Harden when he did play with Durant and Kyrie briefly in Brooklyn, Harden took a backseat usage wise. So like I expect that to be the case on average here. I still think you're gonna I think Embiid maintains like a mid to upper 30s usage rate. But to your point, it's very difficult for him to be getting, 42%, which is basically what he's priced for. And that's without getting into like before Harden came, Embiid was, playing with like a 40 to 42% usage rate and also a 26% assist percentage. The assist percentage is basically cut almost in half. And that's something that I do think maintains because Harden's just going to do pretty much all of that. So I think that it's pretty clear just thinking about it, logically that Embiid is overpriced.
Yeah, and on the other, I don't even know what to make of the Miami side of the game right now. Jimmy Butler, of course, he's questionable because he's always questionable dealing with toe injury. He missed last game. We also have PJ Tucker questionable, Caleb Martin questionable, Max Strus questionable, and then that comes in addition to Kyle Lowry being out for personal reasons. So it's really hard to know for me right now which guys I'm going to want to target for Miami because last game, for instance, I got to a lot of Yurtseven that went extremely poorly, but I also played a lot of Max Strus. I played a lot of Caleb Martin. Those guys are both questionable to play. Do you have any conclusions you could draw from the Miami Heat considering what their injury report is right now?
No, I mean, all I could say is that basically we have the exact same injury report that we had last game. And so we kind of know we know what to do with it. It's just a matter of who knows what it's going to be, right now. This game does start an hour after lock. So, I mean, hopefully we get news early. But, it's basically with Lowry out, we know Butler gets a bump in assist percentage. Hero gets a bump in playing time. Vincent gets a bump in playing time. If Butler is out, in theory, Vincent gets a bump in production. He sure as hell didn't last game, but he should. Hero gets a nice bump both in playing time and usage. Bam Adebayo gets a bump in usage and assist opportunities. There's more minutes for Caleb Martin. There's more minutes for Max Strus. If PJ Tucker is out, that even more so for those guys. But it's kind of impossible to talk about right now.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with this too. I mean, we've got already a shortened rotation, and of that shortened rotation, half the guys are we don't know if they're playing, and Jimmy Butler's obviously a big one. I'll throw in a sports betting angle here. Miami's favored in this game right now. If Jimmy Butler is to get ruled out, that just should not be the case. So if you turn your alerts on for our NBA Twitter account at Awesemo_NBA, if Jimmy Butler gets ruled out, just immediately go bet the Philadelphia 76ers getting points in this spot, because that to me would just be crazy if you get Philly +2 in a spot against a Miami team that have a starting lineup of potentially, I don't even know who would start for this team. If Martin, Strus, Tucker, and Butler are all rolled out, I guess they would have to move Hero into the starting lineup. And then, I don't know. Do you think they'll go back to Yurtseven going up against Embiid?
No, I don't think so. I think the Yurtseven thing was because of Durant. I think they wanted. I mean, they wanted Bam on Durant out of the gate. I talked about it a bit with I think it was with Lofty yesterday. Like, obviously the Yurtseven thing went horribly if you went to him in DFS. I'm still not even convinced that it was like a bad move to get to him, because like he not only did he pick up 2 fouls in his first 6 minutes, they were -11 over that stretch. Like, if they come out and the Nets don't just shoot the lights out right out of the gate and they don't go down 11, like, I think, like, what happens if Miami had been up, they're up 3 when Yurtseven leaves the floor or something. So that whole thing was just weird, but I think it was Kevin Durant based.
Yeah, and so we'll see what the starting lineup looks like. We're going to need more news. So, guys, check out the deeper dive in Live Before Lock, because once again, the Heat injury report: Butler, Tucker, Martin, Strus, all questionable to play. And then Kyle Lowry is out today. It's going to be a spot that probably is value. We just don't know who those pieces are as of this moment.
So it would be weird if they went to Yurtseven, because then it's like they're putting Yurtseven on Embiid so that Bam can guard Tobias Harris.
Yeah, that probably would make a.
I mean, I guess Bam could guard James Harden if they wanted.
Bam could guard anybody. Bam's amazing, but I think the other thing also you mentioned that's pretty important there is they did get outscored by 11 points in the 5 minutes, 57 seconds Yurtseven was on the court. And coaches are going to react to that a lot unless they're like Frank Vogel. So a lot of coaches are going to be like, oh, look, this combination isn't going to work for us. They'll just kind of pull the plug and mix things up. So stick around. We'll have to get more news on Miami to really make any conclusions there. Couple games left to talk about. Next one, Orlando Magic at the Memphis Grizzlies. Orlando, another team with injuries. 5-game slate. Almost every team is banged up right now, though. Jalen Suggs, he's questioned play with an ankle injury. Wendell Carter Jr. is out for the second game in a row because of a non-COVID illness. So let's start by talking about the front court, and then we'll talk about the Jalen Suggs impact. With Wendell Carter confirmed not playing, who benefits in the Orlando front court?
Supposedly Mo Bamba, even though that wasn't the case yesterday. Still got to 24 minutes, dealt with some foul trouble. His rates are better without Carter on the floor this year. Again, obviously he sucked yesterday. Doesn't have the best matchup here against Memphis, but he's still 5,300. I think he looks like a very good value with Carter out. You also, potentially see some more usage and more usage for Cole Anthony and Jalen Suggs potentially. Chuma Okeke should play a lot. Franz Wagner should get more minutes at the 4, which are pretty valuable. So I think it makes Bamba look very good. And then, Anthony, Wagner, Suggs, Okeke all look like pretty solid plays as well.
Now let's talk about the backcourt with Jalen Suggs being questionable, because it's been a little trickier for me to project minutes for the Orlando Magic since Markelle Fultz came back into the mix, because when he's been active in the couple games that's been the case, he's taken away from Jalen Suggs and Cole Anthony a little bit, but that all goes out the window if Jalen Suggs isn't able to play today. So who would you be looking at in this spot if there is no Suggs? For me, it would be pretty hard to get away from Cole Anthony.
Yeah, so I think it mostly would just be a benefit to Cole Anthony in terms of usage and assist opportunities. When you think about like who would fill Suggs' minutes, I don't necessarily think anybody really steps up, assuming that Fultz is still on a minutes limit. If we get something even like Fultz is playing 24 minutes, then 4,500 Fultz looks good. But assuming he's still on his 18 to 20 minutes, it's not like you can do a whole lot with that. If Gary Harris plays 24 minutes at 3,400, yeah, maybe he gets there, but you're not overly excited about that. RJ Hampton, probably plays around 20 minutes or so with Fultz back. So from a minute standpoint, if Suggs is out, unless we get word that Fultz is playing more, there's not much that opens up that excites me, but it does open up usage and assist opportunities for Cole Anthony, and to a lesser extent, probably Franz Wagner.
5,700 for Cole Anthony on FanDuel. He is going to be uber chalk if Jalen Suggs is out, but kind of unavoidable in my opinion. Just to bring up the blowout angle, do you think there's anybody from the Orlando Magic or then also the Memphis Grizzlies on the other side of the game that you think is worth taking a couple of shares of in tournaments just in case this game ends up becoming one-sided?
I don't really think so. Because I don't know. I don't really think there's anybody on Orlando that I'm interested in playing in a competitive game that would probably also be out there for garbage time. Like RJ Hampton would be the closest one there. Like maybe if Suggs is out and you're saying, okay, in a competitive game, I think Hampton gets 20. And if the game blows out, he gets 24. Like it's still thin even thinking about that. But like I assume you're just getting, more Schofield, more Brasdakis. Like you're never rostering those guys just because they might play in a blowout.
Yep, fair enough. And from the Memphis side, I also don't really think there's anybody particular that stands out in a blowout. But talking about the Memphis Grizzlies, we do have Kyle Anderson listed as questionable to play. He's not going to have a massive impact for me. Maybe we could give a couple extra minutes to Brandon Clark, a couple minutes go to DeAnthony Melton. But I don't know that any significant value opens up if Kyle Anderson doesn't able to play. Do you see any real clear impact of a beneficiary if Anderson's out?
Probably not. That's typically just not how Memphis rolls. They'll just throw Tilly into the rotation and call it a day. Yeah, I mean, like it certainly wouldn't hurt DeAnthony Melton's minutes. It wouldn't, hurt Zaire Williams' minutes. He probably would play more, but you're still like, even if you give Zaire Williams 26, 28 minutes, he's not standing out to you. Maybe Brandon Clark picks up a couple of more minutes. His price tag is back down to $4,100. That would be a spot where maybe you can roll the dice. Like if Kyle Anderson's out, maybe you get a few minutes at the 4 for Brandon Clark. If he were to find a way to get to 24 minutes at 4,100, he looks pretty good. That's not a guarantee though, because again, Memphis typically, their tendency is just to say like, oh, okay, this bench guy is out. The next guy up is just going to play, 18 minutes or something.
So my favorite play from Memphis for today is Jaren Jackson Jr. I think he is so much upside at his price point that's now gotten down to sub 7K on FanDuel, only 6,100 on DK. The one thing that's been a little hairy from recently, the minutes haven't been consistent, but he's also gotten a lot of foul trouble as of late. So over the last handful of games,
that's surprising.
he was able to avoid it for a little bit, but it's reared its ugly head again lately. As a result, some recent games, 26 minutes, 26, 32, 26, 19, back up to 36 last game. Do you see any reason to be concerned about his playing time outside of blowout risk or anything like that? Or are we just chalking this up to fouls?
Yeah, I'm chalking up the fouls. I mean, the one sort of negative that I've had to say about Jackson this year is that in the past, it was always like, if Jackson's not in foul trouble, you can count on 33 or 34 minutes. We haven't seen that as frequently this year. Now, last game he did play like 36 minutes, which was good. But in a lot of games this year, even where he's not in foul trouble, it's still just been like, oh, okay, cool. He's playing 28, 29 minutes when he's not in foul trouble. And then when he is, he's playing 20. And so that's made it hard. It's made it difficult when he's like, 7K to get there, even though he's very good. But at 6,100, I'm not as concerned about that, because if he plays 28 to 30 minutes, he looks very, very, very good at 6,100. If he happened to play 35 again, then you're talking about one of the best plays on the slate.
Yeah, so I love Jaren Jackson Jr. Similar about Desmond Bane. I think these are two of the better mid-range options on the slate. So I do like Bane a lot. Do you have any strong Desmond Bane takes or anybody else in the mid-range from Memphis?
No, I think the price tag on Bane at 5,800 combined with shooting guard and small forward eligibility is really useful. The only slight negative Bane thing I have to say, he did play like 33 minutes last game, but it's been weird. He typically is playing 30, 31 minutes, and it kind of just seems like everybody just pencils him in for like 33 minutes and moves on. So he's someone where it's like, I like him on a lot of slates, but he seems like he's overowned pretty frequently. I think as a combination of, one, his positional eligibility being really useful, but two, it just kind of seems like I'm always like a point or two lower on him than others, just because of the playing time. But at 5,800 against Orlando, still a good spot. If he plays 30 minutes, he should look pretty good. Obviously, I'm fine with getting to John Morant as well. I think paying attention to the ownership difference between him and DeJounte Murray makes a lot of sense. I prefer Murray, but if you start to get a big gap in ownership, which right now they're like exactly the same. If you were to start to get a gap in ownership, though, I mean, Morant clearly has the same sort of ceiling.
Yep, that was going to be my next question. I was going to ask you is just where do you, because it's a 5-game slate. All of us, if we're playing a bunch of lineups, over the course of those lineups, we're going to be getting exposure to Murray. We're going to be getting exposure to Morant. Then the question just becomes, what the preference is. But I think it's reasonable to say Murray there. But if you were choosing between Morant and LeBron, which of those two would be your preferred choice?
I think it's really close.
Okay.
I guess LeBron.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reasonable enough answer to say that it's close. I was just wondering if there's any kind of real lean there, because those are really, the three primary pay-up options on the slate that a lot of people are going to be looking at are Murray, Morant, and LeBron.
Yeah, I mean, the tiebreaker for me really, I mean, it's super close for me because obviously LeBron has the more difficult matchup in terms of defense, but I think the playing time is the difference. Like on average, Morant's around 34 minutes. So actually that's another point that I can make real quick with regard to the blowouts too. Also be careful, like Morant averages like 34 minutes per game without Dillon Brooks. Be careful taking that 34 minutes and then saying this game is likely to blow out, so I'm going to take a minute or two away. Memphis is a very good team that plays in plenty of blowouts. In competitive games, Morant plays 36 minutes. So you're already factoring in blowouts to some extent. That's just another thing to keep in mind, like when you're trying to think about minutes there. But Morant averages around 34 minutes. LeBron's averaging around 37. So, you're talking about two guys that average around a fantasy point and a half per minute in their current situations. Morant has the better matchup, but LeBron has the better position and probably is playing a few more minutes.
Yeah, and also the last time Memphis played Orlando, they won via blowout. Morant played limited minutes, only 29, but still.
Was that the game they won by like 70?
They won that game by 20. The game they won by 70 was against OKC, and Morant wasn't there for that game. But the point I was going to make about the Orlando game is even though he played limited minutes, to make that blowout happen, because Morant is such an engine of everything that Memphis does, he still scored over 50 fantasy points in 29 minutes. So it's like, yeah, he played limited minutes, but to your point at the top of the show, in order for them to win by that blowout, just his point per minute production was higher than normal.
Yeah, that's one of those where like the next day people are like, oh, I got screwed because Morant didn't play the fourth in the blowout. And it's just like, well, he like, did you want him to only score 40 through 3 and then score 10 in the fourth, or did you want him to score 50 through 3?
That's not how logic works. And it's funny. It's the same with sports betting. Nobody's ever lost on their own. It's always, it's the blowout, it's the ref, it's the injury. It's always these external factors. But it kind of does tend to be true with some of these blowout situations where guys kind of will oftentimes end up scoring the fantasy points they would have scored anyway.
Right. And I mean, it's like, obviously you don't win tournaments by guys hitting their projections. So like, yes, if Morant scores 50 through 3, the dream is that Cole Anthony or somebody on the other side is keeping them in the game and he plays in the fourth. And that's how you really win a tournament. But like when somebody hits their projection in 5 minutes less than they projected for, you can't be too upset that they didn't play the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And Morant, pretty hard option to avoid on this slate, even with the spread. I think that he should perform well. It just becomes a question of how does he do relative to guys like Murray and LeBron, but I think it's worth getting exposure to all three for today. Sure. Fantasy
Steven Adams should beat the hell out of this front court too.
What was Steven Adams?
Yeah.
So is he somebody that you're prioritizing?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say prioritizing. Like, I think he's in a good spot. I think his salary is about where it should be. Just very likely, I think, to post a pretty nice double-double here.
Fantasy sports fans, what if you caught a break with the potential to net a couple $100,000 with less than $100 investment? Well, we have great news because breaksofgod.com is the place to catch that break. Breaks of God is the latest sports card collecting trend to catch fire in America, and it's how sports card collectors are building high-value card collections without huge investments or risk. It's quickly become a popular and economical way for sports fans to get valuable and rare cards. I know my brother's involved in this, something he does a lot. He's constantly mailing and shipping cards and getting stuff in the mail. So he's involved with that. I know that he enjoys it a whole bunch. To learn about how you can get some big money cards and get 30% off your first break, click on the link in the video description below to go to breaksofgod.com/A30. That's breaksofgod.com/A30 to get 30% off your first break. Also, make sure to follow them on Instagram @breaksofgod. All right, one game left to talk about, and it's this stupid Lakers team that should not be allowed to play on national television anymore, something that Charles Barkley is pushing for. But this Lakers team not watchable. They are not fun. They're not good, but they've played like 50% of their games on national TV this year, which is going to be the case again tonight.
How much do you think Russell Westbrook just looks at the TV schedule and just goes, God damn it, we're on TV again?
I don't even think he cares anymore. Like, I think we're at a point where he doesn't want to be there. The team doesn't want to be there, but they're saddled with this ridiculous contract. And then it's just going to be this thing in the offseason where I make fun of the Lakers a lot on Twitter for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's funny, but number two, their fans are so sensitive. They get so upset about everything negative ever said about them. So they're all convinced like, well, we'll get something good for Westbrook next year. Like, for what? What team is like, we need to trade value for Russell Westbrook?
The Lakers.
If he leaves in the offseason, it's either because they agree on a buyout or the Lakers have taken on bad contracts to get off of his contract. So.
Or the Lakers find the team as stupid as them that will give them something like Kyle Kuzma and KCP and Harrell.
Yeah. So the Knicks maybe then in that case, but it's still, this Lakers team is just brutal to watch. Still though, going to be one that we kind of have to talk about from a pretty big perspective for tonight's game because they're going up against the Golden State Warriors. Steph Curry's kind of been a forgotten man for me lately. I can't remember the last time I got a significant amount of exposure to him, but how does he stack up relative to the other high-end options on the slate? Because I'm going to prioritize guys like Ja Morant and DeJounte Murray over Steph Curry. But do you think Curry just ends up going overlooked for those reasons?
Yes and no. Like, I think he goes overlooked in the sense that anytime Steph Curry is sub 10% owned on a 5-game slate, you can, in a good matchup, you can make a case for him just because, he can knock down 12 3-pointers and everybody goes, oh, Steph's doing Steph things. But he also, I think, is pretty actively behind DeJounte Murray and Ja Morant and LeBron. So the ownership to me makes sense. It's a situation where I guess like I'm not viewing it as, wow, I think the field's getting it wrong playing them more than Steph Curry. I do view it as, in an individual lineup, if I have ownership going to a bunch of other guys and I happen to need a high upside, low owned guy here, Steph Curry certainly gives you that. But I think that he is kind of on a step below those other guys.
Yeah, and also we got Jeremy Savage here. Westbrook is 100% leaving, or he just mails it in another season, collects his $50 million and is like, hey, look, I'm getting paid $50 million to play poor basketball and get yelled at on Twitter. Not a terrible thing to look at either. How about the other guys on the Warriors? Because Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Jordan Poole, individually, I think there's reason to think a lot of these guys could have upside, but there's none that I'm getting to in the initial build I've made at any kind of, high clip or anything that I'm prioritizing them. Do you see it any differently? Are any of these other pieces for the Warriors high priority plays today?
No, it's sort of just, I think, guys to rotate through. Like looking at ownership projections right now, there's nobody above 18%. There's 4 guys between 14 and 18%. That's just kind of how I see it. $4,800 Jordan Poole. If he plays 24 to 26 minutes here, he's likely to be fine. Kevon Looney at 4,300 should give you 24 or 25 minutes. Makes him look fine. Obviously there's plenty of other center plays on the slate, but using him a bit is a good idea. Klay Thompson at 6,500, Wiggins at 6,300. I think they're both pretty fairly priced. We know that Thompson cuts into Wiggins' production, but you've also seen the price tag drop to 6,300. He's still likely to play around 34 minutes. Still certainly can have a big game here against the Lakers. So those two guys both look pretty good, but not like priorities. 3,800 for Porter, 4,100 for Kuminga, both guys that you're not going to be confident in at all, but it doesn't shock anybody if they happen to run into 24 minutes and have a good game. So wouldn't play those two together, but it's kind of just a team that I think fills out your lineups. And then the only guy that I think is like exciting in terms of ceiling is Curry, but he's difficult to get to for the reasons we talked about with all those other guys at the top. And kind of just to elaborate, I guess, on why Curry's a step below those guys, it just comes back to the peripherals. Like, obviously, Steph can score a million points, but DeJounte Murray's a much better rebounder. He has a higher assist percentage as well. LeBron obviously rebounds at a higher rate. Assist percentage is similar. Ja Morant, similar assist percentage, higher usage rate. So you're just talking about, Curry basically being priced up there because of the potential for him to knock down a million threes, whereas everyone else is priced up there because it's what they do every single day.
Yeah, and individually, it's a lot of those Warriors guys, like you said, they're so dependent on scoring, and it's just kind of hard for that to reliably come through. It's kind of like we have the UFC slate later. It's all right, how much of these guys will on a roster that are dependent on getting a knockout within 2 minutes? It could happen, but it's just not something that's the most predictable or likely outcome. So all lower priority plays for me. Is there anything from a value perspective for cheap that you're looking at from the Warriors?
Not really. I mean, Porter, Kuminga, not together, but decent chance one of them has a good game. You got 20 minutes last game from Porter, 17 from Kuminga. It's a good matchup, but you just can't be confident in those guys.
So let's talk on the Lakers side then. And LeBron James is listed as questionable. I'm sure there's going to be a point where he's ruled out, but for right now, it's just a boy who cried wolf situation. LeBron gets listed as questionable every single game. I can't take it seriously. The one that does matter more is that Talen Horton-Tucker is listed as questionable now. He has not played very well this year. And actually last game, nobody even bothered to report that Talen Horton-Tucker wasn't playing last game. He just didn't play. He wasn't even dressed to play in the game. He's sitting on the bench in a suit. Nobody said anything about it until the end of the first quarter. So if Talen Horton-Tucker does not play, who benefits from the Lakers?
Guys that suck and don't matter. I mean, like last game, without him, you got so last game you got Dwight Howard back in the starting lineup. I'm assuming that doesn't happen here. He didn't start the second half of that game, and then now you have the Warriors, where I mean, he could play against Looney, but I kind of doubt that he does. But you got 20 minutes from Kent Bazemore. You got 20 minutes from Stanley Johnson. You got Wayne Ellington back in the rotation to play 12 minutes. DJ Augustine came in and played 22, including garbage time. You just still got a bunch of like crappy players playing 20 to 24 minutes. Avery Bradley's, back available as well. I don't think that it really opens up much that I want to get to. If he's in at 4,400, I don't really want to get to him too much either. I kind of just don't see much one way or the other.
All right. So the only thing left I have to ask you about the Lakers, then we already hit on LeBron before. I think LeBron is a very strong pay up option. But what about Russell Westbrook, who 8,200 on DK? I kind of think that's a fair price at this point. It would have seemed crazy last year to get Russell Westbrook at 8,200. He's all the way down to 7K on FanDuel. Do you find that to be an appealing price point on Russell Westbrook? Because there is a part of me that looks at Russell Westbrook, he's like, 7K for Russell Westbrook. Maybe I should just be separating the name and the price tag from the player we knew in the past because he isn't that guy anymore. But is it crazy to really want to play Westbrook at 7K on FanDuel? He's projected for 17% ownership.
No, I mean, he's not good in a real life standpoint, and he has been disappointing from a fantasy standpoint overall this year, but you're still talking about like 1.1 to 1.2 fantasy points per minute in the games without Davis this year. You're likely getting, 32 minutes, maybe 36 if he plays well, but 32 to 36 minutes if this game's competitive at 7K. It's not the, like, if you said Russell Westbrook without Anthony Davis is $7,000 like at the beginning of this year or at some point last year, like you say he's on the Lakers now, and that's the case, I would just assume that he's like 100% owned. It's not that kind of mispricing, but I think it is back to a situation now where it's like, okay, the pricing is clearly adjusted for what this Russell Westbrook is, and we can go back to playing.
I don't even know what else to talk about from the Lakers. Like Dwight Howard could start. He could score. Dwight Howard could start and play 4 minutes and score 3 fantasy points. He could also start and play 24 minutes and score 40 fantasy points. So he's somebody else I have no clue really what to make of. They also have Wenyen Gabriel, who's now in the mix. Will you have any interest in Dwight Howard if he starts at center again for the Lakers?
If he starts, I mean, at least somewhat, the minutes are still risky. Like last game, you saw him not start the second half and play 16 minutes. I'm assuming for now that he doesn't start. Last game, I was assuming that he would. But yeah, I mean, if he starts, I'll try and swap to some $3,600 Howard, I guess.
And anything else here you want to talk about from the Lakers? It's a team that I really do find hard to get to outside of LeBron.
Yeah, I mean, I like Monk at 5K. Should play, 30 to 32 minutes, assuming he remains in the starting lineup. I think that's a pretty good value for him. One question I think I forgot to talk about on the Golden State side. Who do you think starts with Peyton out?
Boy, that's tough because they've gone so many different ways this year. Let me think. So it's probably going to be doing something to match up against, I mean, part of me wants to say Jordan Poole, but at the same time too, Poole's minutes have kind of been on the decline as of late. Maybe they go Otto Porter Jr. and just go Curry, Clay, Porter, Wiggins, Looney.
I think it's either Porter or Kuminga.
Yeah, I'll go Porter as my guess.
Yeah. So I guess kind of just touch on that for a second. Like Poole could definitely play a couple more minutes with Peyton out one way or the other. But yeah, if you get Porter or Kuminga in the starting lineup, then they just look like better values. It's no guarantee that they play more minutes with like Steve Kerr's rotations. We know that, but it would certainly be a good sign. I mean, you could also just get the Moses Moody spot start where it's just like, okay, well, this is pointless. But yeah, definitely keep an eye out for that starting lineup.
Yeah, we've gotten that Moody. We've gotten that Moody start a bunch this year, and so far as a starter this year, he has made 6 starts, averaging 21 minutes per game in those starts. So from a value perspective, that's the worst case scenario. You get Moses Moody starting because then it's just nobody really benefits. But yeah, something else, keep on the lookout for the Golden State Warriors starting lineup. Also, guys, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out the deeper dive live before lock. There's a lot of players on the injury report today. A lot is going to change. So check out all the rest of our content today. We also got an MMA slate, NHL slate, lots of stuff going on the YouTube channel. Thank you guys for watching. Good luck today.